Hello everyone and welcome to another video with me, 320 Simpilot, and today we are taking a look at a piece of hardware for flight simulation. This is the Simple FCU. Mike over at Simple FCU got in touch and very kindly has sent me over a built model of the Simple FCU to try out and give a bit of a review for you guys. So I hope you enjoy the video. What the FCU is the flight control unit that we use to control the automatics and autopilot of the Airbus A320. It's something that as an Airbus pilot, a real world Airbus pilot, I use all the time flying the aircraft, and its interaction and ergonomics are key to the safety of the automatic systems on the A320. It's really interesting to see it come to Flight Simulator, and that you can now have your own chance to sort of experience how it handles and behaves for a frankly very reasonable price, and I'm going to talk about how it achieves that as we go through the video. So in this video we'll take a look at what the product actually is, how you can get your hands on one, and also what I think of it in terms of flying the Airbus aircraft. I'm a real world Airbus pilot, but none of this is for any real world use. It's just to give you some extra context on your home simulations. Right, let's get started. So here we have the unit on my desk. As you can see, we have speed, heading, altitude and vertical speed display windows, plus the relevant controls for those, or the control knobs, which are correctly made to feel or resemble the actual ones in the aircraft, which are all slightly different for ergonomic reasons. Plus you have the push buttons and some indicator lights at the bottom. We'll see all of this in use throughout the video, so do stay tuned. You'll see me using it in all the different modes and testing out the indicator lights and so on. The unit is 3D printed. I can't stress that enough. So you do not get this full box if you order it. What you get is the controls for the internals. You get the displays, the push and pull buttons, the control knobs, and the lights, but you will need to 3D print the box yourself. So that is a key part of this. Here's the website. If you go to the website, which is in a link in the description, you'll see more information about it. But essentially, if you don't have access to a 3D printer, then you're going to have a hard time. They don't ship it fully made. 149 euros though for all the controls. You can see them there, and that's what you'll need. A bit of electrical experience, such as soldering, to put it together in your 3D printed box. It takes 2 or 3 days printing, I believe. I don't 3D print. This was a review unit sent to me, but it is entirely my own opinions, of course. This is not my unit. This is just a review sample that was pre-built, as it were, but there's some more technical information available on the website. There's a very active community, including an FAQ, of course, but they have an active community who construct the software for this, so it is compatible mainly with the Airbus, but it will work with other aircraft because, of course, you can use MobiFlight software to change what these inputs mean and change the outputs and all sorts. So it's very clever. You'll see an example of that later on in the video where I change the config around to what I actually want it to be. So very customizable. Here's the box itself. You can see that it's 3D printed. You've got a large sort of footprint, I would say. It's similar in size, slightly bigger perhaps than my Thrustmaster TCA with the add-ons, but some rubber feet on the floor stop it sliding around on my desk, which is great when you're using it. And certainly if you're an avid Airbus flyer, you'll have no trouble fitting this into your desk, I'm sure. But it does take up some space. It is worth noting. It has more depth than you would imagine looking at the front of it. As you can see, lit up or backlit buttons, which is great. They make a nice mushy feel, which is actually similar in travel to what the real aircraft buttons do. They make a clicking noise, which is satisfying, but not what the real aircraft does. But no complaints from me for that. Then you have the dials, which can turn, obviously, the altitude selections and so on. All of this, by the way, compatible with the fly-by-wire A320X pretty much out the box. You can download that config almost straight away. But for some other aircraft, you may need to do some tinkering. It is compatible with X Plane 12, but again, some tinkering probably required. As you can see, you get the green indicator light once you press the button in, and you're going to see lots of this throughout the video today. And there's our parking brake indicator all working. The control knobs for the altitude and heading and so on can be pushed and pulled, which is really impressive. I think they've done a great job with that, and it's nice to see it replicated because that is a key feature of the A320's autoflight system, and this has been done really well. They're slightly more sort of they pop or they click a little bit more satisfyingly perhaps than the real aircraft, which is a bit more mushy and springy than these ones, but even so, totally functional. And I find it very reliable to sense what I want it to do. Every time I've pushed or pulled one of these knobs, they have done exactly what should be expected with it. You can see as well there's a speed Mac button up in the middle. We'll talk about that later on. It does function as a speed Mac, but I actually changed my mind about what I want it to do later. For scrolling through the altitudes, you can see slow scrolling gets you hundreds, and then you can move it fast to get thousands. And I'm not exactly how the real aircraft is done, but still functional. And again, lots more use case of this coming up very shortly. So here we are in one of my favorite airports of the moment. Wellington, the flight being Wellington, we are using, of course, the A32NX, and I can show you the exterior here. This is using the Simple FCU livery, which they kindly sent over as well. Do disregard that MCDU message. That's nothing to do with the Simple FCU. And we're going to just take it off, and I'm going to show you a few flights around, or a few uses of the FCU as we fly the aircraft with the autopilot, which is, of course, when it's going to be absolutely the most useful. So, first of all, as you can see, we have it set up with a managed speed, and I can show you over here in the flight deck. We have managed speed, and just to prove it matches, managed speed. Then we have managed heading, i.e. nav mode, which is armed, not active, but this is typical on the ground. And then we have the outer window, which currently says 7,300 feet, and it's in managed because climb, a managed mode, is armed. You can see 6,000 feet is actually a restriction on the predicted flight path, so that's what we get on down here on the PFD. But we get the selected altitude that we want to put in the window up here, which is correct. These wouldn't match in this situation because I put it above a restriction. We must be below 6,000 at, or flight level 60 at this point out here. If I just turn off the terrain at UGEC. So anyway, if I set that to 6,000, you can see here, I can scroll down and put it to 6,000, and that's fine. And you can see if you do it slowly, you get nice control in hundreds of feet. But if you just spin it, it will work in thousands. So I've used this on a stream already and not had any particular issues with that setup, but it is something you have to get used to, and it's not quite how the real aircraft does it. The real aircraft, as you can see, has the 100s and the 1000s set up, so you can choose between the two, which is a good system. But there we go. So I'll just put 6,000 feet in the window. You can see here as well, VS has got 000 written. That's because I was playing with it earlier, so I was pushing it in and putting it out to set different VSs and so on. But on the ground, this feature is not really going to do anything. The VS is largely irrelevant, so I'm just going to push it in and leave it there at 0. What I want to see is these, climb and nav mode. Now you can see the flight directors. We have one FD2 on our PFD. You can see the buttons are lit up here. If we come down to our FCU, this is going to be hard for me. I never film real life and sim at the same time. But if we look down at the FCU, you can see that we have the little flight director light displayed here, which tells me the flight directors are on. Now if I turn those flight directors off, which we can do in the sim, they're actually connected in the there's only one sort of guidance system in the A32NX, but as you can see, the light turns off and then I'll turn it back on again. Not quite the same for the LS button here. We do have our own dedicated LS button, so if I press that, the light comes on and the LS scales appear here on the PFD, so I can do that entirely from here. This brings me to one of my first features of this Simple FCU that I would perhaps modify if I had my own that I was going to build and set up. I would probably change this expedite button to be an FD button, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I don't particularly use the expedite button. However, it does work very well, but I don't particularly use it in the real aircraft. You can also see landing gear indicators. We have our 3 greens, which is correct for what we have here on the aircraft as well, and the park brake is set. If I release the parking brake, then the light goes out. So that feature works, which is very good. Some of this backlighting may not look very strong at the moment. That's because I've got bright lights on here for my camera, but the lighting, you actually have lit LCD displays for your FCU. Then you have orange sort of ambient backlighting on the push buttons, as well as the lights down here for your flight directors, landing gear and parking brake. When you engage a button like the LS, you can see that you do actually get the green light illuminating, which is similar to what you have on the real aircraft. You'll see that the LS button has been done in the same format as the autothrust autopilot switches. You can see that the LS button is a slightly different format in the real aircraft. It's slightly smaller, but yeah, largely the same setup. You've got the little green bar across it to show you when it's engaged or not. Again though, looking here is not where we look. We actually look in the PFD is where you're going to get the actual information. Sorry, not FD, LS. But there we go. Right, let us get the airplane into the air and have a look. So we're going for our takeoff now, half side stick forward, 50% on the N1s, and we'll get ourselves going. Should be holding the brakes really, but there we go. Right, this was the old technique of taking off an Airbus. There's 50%, 2 clicks forward, man flex 55, SRS runway, auto thrust is armed and blue. And away we go. Like I say, not too much on the FCU to do on the ground except setting in that stop altitude really. We leave it all in managed mode and we turn on the flight directors if they are off. There's 100 knots, stick to neutral. V1, and rotate. This is a flat 3 takeoff today. Bit of stutter from my sim, apologies for that. Having trouble with that recently. There's positive climb, and we'll put the gear up. And keep an eye on those 3 lights now down here as I raise the gear. And there they go. Lights are out. Pretty cool. I'm going to now engage the autopilot. So I must remember I have an FCU. So I'm going to press AP1. So I press it. Light comes on, and as you can see, AP1. We have nav and SRS. We're still at manflex 55. There's no auto thrust light yet because we're not using the auto thrust. The auto thrust is now armed. In the real aircraft, the light would be on. You can see here. However, it does not yet come on the Simple FCU, something I have noticed. But all we have to do now is I'll move my thrust levers back. Thrust climb, auto thrust. So now the auto thrust is engaged, the green light has come on. So it's minor difference there. We'll just bring the flaps to 1. Now we're above the F speed. So now we're in thrust climb, nav, autopilot 1. You can see here we have flight directors on, but the landing gear and park brake lights are now out. And it's making the turn following our SID. Now we don't have, sadly, any EFIS controls, so I can't adjust the range of the nav display, I can't set the QNH, things like that. These would be great additions. I'd love to see this arrive to extend this module. I'd love to have this control, because this is something we use a lot on the aircraft. So anyway, for now, I will put standard on there. Above the S-speed, flaps at 0. Speed brakes disarmed. Get rid of some of the lights. Excellent. So, not really an Airbus tutorial today, but just showing you how it might behave in your sort of normal takeoff situation. So now we're going to take the airplane on a bit of flying, and I'm going to show you how it behaves for that. So you can see here that it has the 6,000 stays in the window, which is correct for the real aircraft, 6,000, and that is where it's going to level off. But air traffic might say now, well, in fact, let's just watch it do a level off. So we're 1,000 feet to go. Any second now we're going to outstar. And I'm not really expecting anything to change. We're in managed speed, heading, and altitude. Now it's gone into outstar. It does lose the magenta dot because it's no longer a sort of a managed mode. Now I've got to tell you, these dots that appear, sorry, it's not magenta, these amber dots, they appear in the real aircraft to signify sort of a managed number. Whereas VS, you just get dashes because, of course, it's not managed, it's not being used at all. But it is, yeah, it's an interesting feature of the Airbus, and it's nice to see it replicated so accurately and correctly, really, in the Simple FCU. Yes, it is outside of the LCD window, but that hardly makes a difference. It's certainly in the right place. So there we go, we're now at 6,000 feet. Now let's say air traffic asks us to climb to flight level 100. So I will spin this up to 100. And there you go, there you see the first. I get used to doing it in hundreds and then I spin it too fast, but that's something you can definitely get used to. I'll put it into 100 and you can see we've got magenta here, it's not wanting to climb. If I push it in, we get the managed dot correctly on the FCU and correctly in the aircraft, but it's not going to climb there, it's in out constraint mode. So I can pull the altitude now, that little pop, thrust climb, open climb. Now we get out blue 100 and the aircraft will start its climb. You'll see the managed dot has gone away because we're no longer managing that. I don't know how well it's showing up in the video for you. And I can't go back into manage, by the way, because now we are up above that constraint. It doesn't seem to want to take it. There we go. Likewise with the heading. You can see the amber dot. If I pull, dot goes out, heading mode straight away in the aircraft, and we get 217. And now I can just steer the aircraft as you would if you're giving heading 285. There you go. 285. In general, the responsiveness of these controls is very good. They all have a notched feel, so you can actually feel as you pass each individual digit, which is obviously completely crucial to operating an aircraft. Every now and then I'll notice that it skips the first control. I don't know why, so you just miss one digit. Very rare, and I'm not sure what causes it, but it's not really distracting. You can certainly manage without, even when it does that. So as you can see now, I'm just going to keep flying the aircraft around using this. But yeah, a little notch, and that's true of all the controls, all these control knobs. So same for the speed, you can do each individual notch, and it won't surprise you now if I pull the speed, the amber dot goes away, and now you can see on the PFD we're in selected speed, and up we go. I'm a little surprised actually. This must be a bug with 82 and X because we've got magenta 60 down here, but it's leveling off at 10. So anyway, let me just pull that. Put it into the right place. Okay, so we're now routing to AVPOD at 10,000 feet. I've got the speed set to 300, and as you can see, moving around quite happily. There we go. So each of these knobs has notches, so you can move individual digits at a time, which is good. Every now and then it does miss one, quite rare. I'm not sure. There you go. I just did one and it didn't go from 299. I think maybe it's a change of direction. It might miss the first one, but even so, hardly an issue. So you very soon get used to it, and I don't find it too distracting, but it's something I have seen occasionally. Same with the heading. You can spin the heading rug around all notch, which is very good, and they are slightly different styles of control, as you can see here. So they do feel slightly different. They do represent the ones in the aircraft, as you can see, but how accurately is open for debate. But yeah, definitely representative of it, which is nice to see. So detail here in the sort of ergonomic design of the Airbus, along with these managed amber dots, is very impressive. I really like it. So now we're going around in selected, and we are in managed nav. So you can see this is another key feature. I can actually turn the heading bug around, which you can do in the Airbus, even though I'm in nav mode, because this amber dot still shows me I'm in nav mode despite the fact I have a heading. And it's not until I pull that heading, there we go, heading, that it actually gets rid of the dot and heads towards that point. Same with the altitude. I can wind it in and move it around 15,000. It's not going to do anything until I pull, and there we go, thrust climb, open climb. So let's go up to 15,000 now. We'll just keep going in this direction for a bit longer. Let's have a look at the vertical speed. It won't surprise you to hear that it basically works as expected. You can pull the vertical speed and it goes into 700. It doesn't have a plus written there like the real aircraft does. You can see there's a plus, but if you wind it down, it does go into a minus. So we have minus 700 feet per minute, and this is all accurately replicated by the aircraft. Minus, plus, 150, and yeah, I can push it to level off. What the FCU does is it actually puts in these dashed lines, but the real aircraft it does actually display 0000, and it would say VS0 as well. So that's one small difference, but it does still function correctly, even if that display is slightly different. As I said earlier, you can put in the LS now, and we can prepare for our approach. We're about to head back into Wellington on the ILS, and you can also arm the localizer mode and the approach mode over here. Now, moving on to some things that it can also do, we can press speed Mach, and we can change this speed from knots into a Mach number. So I press it and it transitions over. So it says 0.53, so it has the decimal place. But I am not entirely convinced about this feature. The speed Mach button is not one I use very often. There are some circumstances, such as in descents or if air traffic control asks you to change something. Thrust climb, open climb, get it going up to flight level 150. Yeah, so there are occasions where you might change the speed from knots to Mach, but it's not a massive feature, and I wouldn't mind doing that in the aircraft for the times I need it. What I would prefer this button to be, and what the real button in this position would be, i.e. between heading and alt, is a track FPA button. And what this enables us to do is bring up the bird. The reason I say this is because just before entering manual flight, let's say after a non-position approach, a common thing to do would be autopilot off, flight directors off, and then bird on. Now, that would be nice if we could do that, because of course your autopilot is off and we're flying single pilot here in these sims. In real life you'd get the other pilot to do these things. I noticed as well I managed to get heading 438 there, quite impressive. There we go. Yeah, so the changing this to track FPA is something that the other pilot would do for you, and it's a bit of a distraction having to do it yourself. So I would certainly look into changing the mode of that button, and I might even change the text on it, because after all this is just a computer with switches, so there's nothing to stop you changing this to be a different input into the sim if you get familiar with the software of MobiFlight. That brings me on to my next thing that I would change, which would be this expedite button. As I said earlier, I don't really use it. It does work, so if we put in 20,000 feet or 21,000 feet, press expedite, it lights up and we get thrust climb, expedite climb, and up we go. But I just don't use it in the real aircraft. I would probably change this one to be a flight director input. That's what I would prefer. But there we go, because that way you could turn off the autopilot using your joystick or button that you have for that, and then you could go flight directors off with that button, and then press this button for track FPA, and that would be bird on, and that would be just like what we've done on the Airbus for many years now. But there we go, just some small things there that are totally available to change, but just that I wouldn't bother with too personally, because I don't use either of those two particularly. But they do function, which is great, and you know, this is perfect for an FD button. It's got the light and everything, and this is perfect for the track FPA button. It looks the same, and it's sat there in the right place. So, as if by magic, I asked Mike over at FCU for some help with this, those changes that I just discussed with you, and without even closing the sim, by changing the config file in MobiFlight, you can do this. Now, I am not overly familiar with this. Let me just refresh that heading. I'm not overly familiar with this, but it is possible to learn these steps, I think, quite easily. The MobiFlight software is quite good, and if you've certainly managed to go to the journey of 3D printing anything, I'm pretty sure you could learn how to adjust the config of MobiFlight. Many of you may already be familiar with it, certainly more than I am. But now look, as I asked for, this speed map button no longer does the speed map, and it does the track FPA. And then I can see over here, I get my, instead of vertical speed, I have an FPA angle, which is great. There you go, minus 1.5, plus 1.5, and you can see the aircraft's in out start, so I won't do it. So let's put in minus 1.2 and pull, and now, lo and behold, we have FPA minus 1.2, and down it goes. Let's put an altitude in below us so it has something to aim for. And there we go. So that is a really great addition, and then I can transfer it over and we get the 800. So just like the aircraft button. Same down here for expedite. That now is a flight director button, so it turns off the flight directors. Fantastic. Really, really great. So now you can go autopilot off, flight directors off, bird on. Fantastic. That is, just shows you, yeah, the options you have with this. And I'm amazed by the MobiFlight software that this could be changed without even closing the sim, because it doesn't involve the sim. It seems to be running through the Arduino inside this FCU and its interaction with the computer. Again, I'm explaining that terribly, I'm certain. I'm sure many of you have better ideas about it. Right, there's autopilot 1, put it back into PS and heading, and there we go, back where we were. So we're now heading round to begin our approach into runway 34 at Wellington. Beautiful, beautiful scenery here, which is why I love using this scenery. But there we go. So as you can see, we are now in speed, a Mach mode of 6.3, because the aircraft will automatically swap between the two. But with my new settings, I will now click that there, and we get speed. So I think that is a more useful use of these switches, which is great. And of course, you could change. This is a backing plate that goes behind these switches. So you've got a 3D printed box, 3D printed controls, switches are all inside, but you could simply change or print out your own sort of back plate and change that to say track FPA, and likewise you could change this to say FD, or whatever you fancy doing. You might even, because it's not too often we use the localizer button, so you might put flight directors here as they would be, and LS here, depending which way you want it. But yeah, I would certainly leave approach over here where it is in the real aircraft, but I could definitely consider getting rid of expedite and possibly localizer, depending. Don't use those particularly often, but depends what sort of flying you do. Great, so now we are heading down. I'm just going to put it into thrust idle open descent, and now with the selected speed I can wind that up, and it's just great. I really like this. It gives me a lot of freedom. How many times have you sat in the simulator and you've been trying to scroll like this, and then I've done it a lot in stream, and it's partly my fault, but it's partly to do with if you're in turbulence and things like that, and you don't zoom in too much, then your mouse can get wobbled up into the wrong click spot, and then you're just zooming in and out, which is just a feature of simulators in general. So it's really nice to have that, and then my option to be in heading mode and then push it back in and go back into nav mode. Just a bit of additional control over it there. So let's go up to 330 knots, really get some speed going on here, and down we go. Look at that. Excellent. So this combined with my Thrustmaster sort of equipment, we have a lot of the Airbus controls that we use day to day ready in front of us. Something to note is that the switches do click a very small amount, but they do make a very satisfying click. So I'm very happy with that. Very functional. The real aircraft, they actually move slightly more and they're a little bit more springy, so they don't make quite a sort of popping sort of click like this. They actually are a little bit sort of more mushy, I would say. So I can't say that this is worse. I think this is very nice, but it's certainly very direct. Those little rubber feet on the bottom of this particular unit are particularly useful, because I find that I can actually pull, there's just enough force needed that I can pull and push these knobs without it moving. I am using this surface on my desk is a mouse mat style surface that covers my whole desk. But yeah, I do find that I'm not having any trouble with it sliding towards me too much. I mean, it does every now and then if you really pull it, but yeah, not something I have to think about, which is really nice. It's not like you have to stabilize it, which is something I was worried about. So that's very good indeed. And down we go, and you can see we are going to need to keep going down. So I have to fight the urge to reach for my my mouse, because I can just put in 3000, thrust idle, open descent. Just brilliant. Really good. Now we are, of course, incredibly high here. So I'm going to go full speed brake. Going to pull that speed and get down. See what we can do. Now it's in this sort of situation when you're on sort of approach that this FCU is going to really come into its own. It's when you're being heavily controlled by air traffic control. For example, if you're using VATSIM and you're getting vectored into London Gatwick or somewhere that's very busy, or you've got lots of aircraft around, then this is going to be incredibly useful. Because what we're going to do is, for example, you'll be given a heading, turn right heading, let's say 080. So just pull the heading and put it in. Now you see there, that is the one thing you have to be careful not to overshoot, because it does start to jump up faster. So you just have to be a little bit aware of that. I'm trying to notice if the real aircraft it does it individually every time. I think it might be individual units on the heading every time, but I would need to check that. So let's start heading away, and I'm actually going to manage the speed now as if we're being vectored sort of for a slightly longer final than we originally thought. We've got the speed brakes out anyway, and we're going down to 3,000 feet. Now I would have to reach for the mouse to set the Q&H, sadly, but there we go. And now we're on the Q&H. You can see that the LS button is lit up. I can get rid of that, turn them off, but at 10,000 feet we would have turned those on. And basically all we have to do from here is the approach button. Now once the speed gets back, I would like to prove to you something which I did check, which is these landing gear lights. We have 3 individual lights, and I wanted to check that they did actually fail correctly, or they only showed you the landing gear you did actually have. So if I were to put in a failure, which we do now have fantastically on here, so the main left gear is now jammed. We get the speed back below the limit of 250 knots, so I don't have to reach for anything. I can just wind the speed back myself. Let's go back to 230. There it is. So here we go, and now I'm going to lower the gear, and I'm expecting one of the gear not to secure. So keep an eye on these lights down here. And we'll compare it to what the aircraft gives us. Nose gear light is lit. Right main gear, but the left main gear does not light up. So that is really great. Individual LEDs here do work for the failure, or the actual individual landing gear, which I really like. So now we can raise those, and they should come back to life. Now I've cleared that fault. But yeah, just another demonstration of sort of the power of this unit to have all these features working. I'm really impressed. I hope I'm getting that across in its ability to. I got it out the box, and I was not so sure. It is 3D printed. You know, this isn't an iPhone. It is a 3D printed piece of equipment. But when it comes to actually using it, it behaves exactly as I wanted it to. And there's nothing more frustrating when you're used to flying a certain aircraft to trying to replicate that and finding that it's not behaving as you expect it to. That is just because you use it every day. So you get your muscle memory and so on are all set certain ways, and suddenly you find it's not like you want. With this FCU unit, I find that I can control the automatics and the FCU as I would expect to with the real aircraft quite intuitively. So like I say, some minor differences. The way these pull and push is slightly different to the real aircraft, and also the buttons make a nice clicking noise, which I actually quite like, but the real aircraft does not do that when you press in the buttons. However, they do have a nice sort of squidgy travel to them, which is similar to that of the real aircraft, which I do like. I would definitely say that. Let's get rid of the speed brakes. But there we go. So now it's time to bring the aircraft in on our approach. So let's send it to the Amaga waypoint. Direct. There we go. Nav. And you can see that we've lost our heading. Push it in, and then we get the amber dot. And what I'm going to do now is activate the approach phase in the MCDU, and then manage the speeds. That then disappears, and we get the amber dot. We've already got the LS button pushed, so we can see the India Mike Papa ILS is identified 109.9, and now we're heading in. Next step is simply to arm the approach and the second autopilot, and then we'll be flying down towards Wellington. Now the next waypoint is actually only a restriction at above 2,000 feet, so I'm going to put 2,000 feet in the window. And what I'm going to do is push it in and let the aircraft decide how high we need to be. That gives us speed and DES mode. You can see it has a sort of VNAV in the A320X, which is 800 feet above us, so it will just do a gentle descent until it intercepts that profile. We're 18 miles out now, so I'm going to put flap 1. Wouldn't have to out here, but yeah, we'll just start preparing the aircraft for the landing. Just trying to test the lighting. I don't do real lighting, so I don't know if that's better or worse, but there you go. You can maybe see the backlight now a little bit better, that we've got the sort of amber, which always sits there whether the switch is in use or not. I notice I have lost some of my other backlights, which could be to do with changing the config around when I've gone for the speed max. So something I will fiddle with in MobiFlight later. And that's sort of the thing with a lot of these, the customization. You can see it's very flexible. This is not a set product where you need to wait for software to come to you. You are able to customize this yourself, which is really very good. Something as well to note whilst we're here, I'll talk about using it with other add-ons. It does work indeed with the Phoenix, which I have used in Flight Simulator 2020 or Microsoft Flight Simulator. However, not straight away out of the box. The config files have to be changed. There is a very active community of users for this product, and they have made the config files so you can actually go and just download those and then install those into your MobiFlight, and it will work. For example, the problem I had with my initial version of the Phoenix software was that although all the controls worked, the displays here did not display correctly. But that is simply a function of taking a bit more time, and then you can have it set up and working correctly for what you want it to do. It also works with X Plane 12, because of course MobiFlight does work with X Plane 12. So if you want to set it up with a towless aircraft, for example, you can give that a go, or I'm sure a community member would have already done it, or will likely do one in the near future as well. So now we're heading in for the approach. Let's arm the approach, and then we immediately get lock star, Cat 3 single, AP1. Glide slope will be coming down from above in a few miles, about 4 miles. So what else can we do? Well, we could engage the second autopilot. If I press that, we get AP2. Now we have Cat 3 dual, AP2, which is exactly as you'd expect on the real aircraft. And there you go. Not much more to do with the FCU now. I'm going to put out the second stage of flap and then set the go around altitude in the window once we start down on the glide slope, which we're not yet. You'll notice there is a separate localizer button, which, like I say, you can press and you get the green light, just missing that backlight right now. But I'm going to re-engage the approach and the second autopilot. There we go. So you can see how it's interacting all the time with the simulator, and I found it to be remarkably reliable. We've seen earlier sometimes the heading was getting a bit confused, but aside from that, I haven't seen or had any particularly strong issues with it. So we're about to join the glide slope. There it is, glide slope star. You can see 2,000 feet in is white now, which is the new sort of software fit of the Airbus. And then I can just put in the go around altitude on here and leave it there. Let's say it's 4,000. I'm not sure what it is in Wellington, but there we go. And then you can leave that there. And that's it now. Last thing to show you really is the autopilot disconnect. You can of course press these buttons and it will disconnect the autopilot. That is not the normal way to disconnect the autopilot on the A320. Back to Cat 3 dual AP1+2. If I use my Thrustmaster TCA and I disconnect it myself, there it goes, and you can see it drop the lights out as you would expect. So again, just showing you it all works as expected. That's sort of the theme of the video. Very impressed. As I said, I've been sent this to review. I've not been paid or anything. This is entirely an honest opinion of mine for this unit and what I think of it. So overall, very impressed with the functionality. I think the quality of the switches is very good, and again, their functionality, most importantly, is excellent. I think the unit is quite big, so it takes up a lot of space on your desk, and I think that could be limiting for some people, depending on how you have it set up. I have a big desk, but by the time I have my computer, Airbus hardware, keyboard and mouse accessible, this is quite a big unit. But it's totally possible, as I'm proving to you here. So if you're dedicated for your Airbus enough, then there you go. I also think that the 3D printing side could be a limiting factor for some. I don't have a 3D printer or access to it, and I don't really expect to go out and buy one, so it would only be for people who are already into that hobby or know someone who could do the printing. As I said, it takes a fair bit of time to do the printing, although for 3D printers that may be a normal amount of time. I'm not familiar with what would be expected. But once you get it, and if you can get it all put together with a bit of wiring and a bit of soldering and so on as required, which are all, they provide good instructions for that, but yeah, a bit of extra technical know-how required for that sort of stuff. But what you get is really excellent, a really affordable but very capable FCU unit here with the customization to do what you actually want with it, which I really like. So right now it's time to fly our landing, so you won't see much over on that FCU, but we'll take the autopilot out and I will give it a go. Beautiful scenery, absolutely love the scenery. I can't sing enough praises for this flight beam scenery. Bit of a wobble in the glide slope, which we know Flight Simulator does, and same with the Pappies there. So just flying it towards the middle of that touchdown zone.
50, 40, 20, retard.
Idle.
10, 5.
There's the touchdown, reverses out. And we'll go for some manual braking today. Spoilers, reverse green. And we are decelerating. And welcome back to Wellington. So that's all for today's video. I hope it's been interesting to you. There we have an FCU with a bit of community input and 3D printing and all sorts going on to get you a reasonably priced flight control unit for your A320 at home. As you can probably tell, I'm very impressed with it. So it works particularly well with the A320nx out of the box, which is great, but also offers plenty of customization to those of you willing to tinker a little bit with it. And it doesn't seem to take too much work if you are technologically minded, or certainly, like I say, if you're at the level that you can 3D print yourself, then it shouldn't be too much of an issue for you. There'll be plenty more videos, live streams and guides coming to the channel, so do please subscribe if you'd like to see those. Otherwise, we'll see you again in another of those videos or live streams. Thank you very much for watching. Bye bye.